World's been at a critical moment as a result of complex and interconnected crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, humanitarian challenges, a tipping point in climate change, as well as growing concerns about threats to the global economy and security. All this demonstrates that the concept of international security is more heterogeneous and interconnected than ever before. The 77th session of UN General Assembly on Global Security addressed all these issues, but is there any concrete solution? This is All 24 News special coverage. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm your host, Karim Faz-Zakri. And before we bring in our guest, here is the latest. Leaders from around the world are continuing to address the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Conflict in Ukraine highlighted the widening gap between the West and the East. Let's follow this report.
The UN General Assembly, in its 77th version, continues its series of speeches in which positions are set on issues such as Ukraine, terrorism, and climate change. Mexican Foreign Minister criticized the handling of the war in Ukraine by the UN Security Council as he addressed the United Nations General Assembly on Thursday.
The Security Council, it has to be said, has not been able to fulfill its United Nations Charter mandate, having failed to prevent the war nor taken the measures to stop the armed conflict. Even less has it managed to direct any diplomatic process to reach a solution by way of dialogue and negotiation.
Amid the threat of a fresh unrest in the Kosovo region, Serbia's leader appealed for sympathy by comparing his country's situation to that of Ukraine.
We could hear from many speakers the stories about aggression and violation of territorial integrity of Ukraine. Many say that this was the first conflict on the European soil after the World War II. But the truth that the territorial integrity of a country in Europe, Serbia, as a matter of fact, which did not attack any other sovereign country, was violated, is constantly unspoken.
Africa also had its share of discussion. Umaro Sissoko Embalo, president of Guinea-Bissau, warned the international community that terrorism, violent extremism, and transnational crime in the Sahel regions threaten peace in the world.
The stability of much of our continent in general, and West Africa in particular, is threatened by insecurity caused by terrorism, violent extremism, and transnational crime, which violate the principles of the rule of law and democracy.
Never has the international order seemed so fractured, and the conflict in Ukraine has revealed a new map of global power relations. The General Assembly once again failed to reach its main objective, which is to place the World Organization back at the center of the international political game.
All right, let's bring in our guests. We have via Skype Ms. Zhang Shanghui, a journalist of CGTN, China National Television from Beijing, along with Mr. Mustafa Rogab, a chair of the Egyptian Association in Europe from London, and also Alessandro Gargaridis, an international security and geopolitical analyst from Budapest. Gentlemen, madam, thank you so much for agreeing to be with us. And let's kick it off with you, Ms. Zhang. We can say that alongside the armed conflict threatening the lives of millions and also shaking their communities, new threats, however, prevail in our time, which make the content of security a distinctive one. Today, the global pandemic of COVID-19, ongoing Russian military operation, and resulting global challenges of food security, health security, poverty, as well as other economic challenges and risks of military clashes, demonstrate that the concept of international security is more heterogeneous and interconnected than ever before. How do you read this yourself?
For me, I think it is a very important issue today that we hear talking about all those challenges that we're facing with today, with the Ukrainian problems, which is actually one of the most debatable issue today in the world. And also, there are also other challenges that are beyond us. But when we actually look at in this situation, this very struggling situation, and what is the role of China, it is a very key issue. And what can China playing like a role, especially today in the world stage, is very important. Where is the role of China, and what can China do to contribute to the world peace? That's something very important. So when we see like what happened this time in the General Assembly in the United Nations, we can see that China is still there, stressing in their position paper of China for this 77th session of the UN General Assembly, say that China do stress on the multilateralism, observing that the purpose and the principles of the UN Charter and the basic norms are governing the international relations. And China is also talking about more consultations and also take the promotion of the Secretary General's report on our common agenda as an opportunity to keep improving the efficiency of the UN. So here, Chinese position is more multilateralism and for the world peace.
And what about you, Mr. Alessandro Gargarides? Some argue that despite the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the US administration has tried to keep its focus on China as the most consequential strategic challenge of the US. Russia, by comparison, is considered, let's say, the acute yet short-term threat. How do you read it?
Well, for sure, the United States intended and still intends, in my opinion, to keep its focus on the Indo-Pacific and on China in the specific, and that was for sure the initial intent before the war in Ukraine, which came rather as a shocking moment, and we remember how they scrambled basically to modify the official declarations and documents just after the war started to shift what was initially a very China-focused stance to reflect the new challenge, the new conflict that was happening in Ukraine. And as much as the term acute, I believe that it does not only imply acute in the sense of short term, but also the fact that differently to China, which has so far never used direct military force to assert its objectives, Russia has this time and also in the past, let's not forget Georgia, for example, used direct military force to achieve its foreign policy goals. So I think it's considered also a more direct and also partially, as you note, short-term threat, whereas Beijing is regarded more as a long-term geostrategic competition that will play out through the years, if not decades.
Very nice indeed. And Alessandro, experts said that Xi Jinping is unlikely to abandon his old friend Vladimir Putin, even as the Russian leader's decision to send thousands more troops to Ukraine and his nuclear threats strain Beijing's no-limits partnership with Moscow. They said China will instead dig in on its awkward stance of calling for dialogue and peaceful resolution while refusing to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What is your opinion?
Well, China has tried to keep a balanced stance, so to speak, and as you have noted, which I believe can be explained also in relation to the specifics of the Russian-Chinese relationship and partnership. Yes, they are partners, but not full allies, and something that is often neglected, especially in the Western political discourse, is that yes, they are cooperating out of shared rival, namely the United States, but there are also divergences in between China and Russia in regards of objectives and in regards to partnership with other countries, just for example, India, just to make an example. So I believe that China will be somehow neutral. It will not arrive at supporting Putin outrightly and directly, but it will try to keep its partnership with Russia out of convenience for its own geopolitical interests.
And Mr. Mustafa Ragab, is the US, like many observers and analysts are saying, hoping to counter China's growing influence in Asia, despite what's happening, in Ukraine?
Well, the United States have got their plans, and it's very clear that they have managed to do their plans so far. There is a lot of messy situation on the ground, and the Ukrainians are getting a lot of help from the West now, especially the United Kingdom, France, and America. And there is a lot of new weapons on the ground now. The reports we are getting, says that the Ukrainians are gaining some control, but the reports we're getting from other news agencies does not say that. So we're really getting in a very messy situation here. But if we go back to how this all started, and the Americans tried to surround the Russian, and really got them into a very nervous situation. And the Russians have got no choice but to go into this situation because there is no political negotiation between the sides. The Ukrainians said they're going to negotiate, but unfortunately, they have gone back on that. There is a lot of damage on the ground in Ukraine, but we're getting the opposite reports that the Ukrainians are gaining space on the ground. So we're looking here at a situation that might lead us to a very dangerous situation if the Russians been squeezed more to use their atomic bomb or nuclear weapons. This might come to a very, very dangerous situation. The United States have managed to get the support of a lot of countries, such as the UK, France, but regarding the other side, that the Russians are getting the support indirectly from China and from other countries, but all indirect support. So we're looking at two team individuals now who are competing on the ground to see will the Russian still stand a chance? Because if we read the situation on the ground, we will see that the truth is not there. If we go to the United Nations, obviously, the campaign, it depends on the campaign, not on what's right and what's wrong. The American very good in campaigning on the United Nations and taking things into their advantage. The Russians don't have this power, don't have the power to campaign. We know that they're going to get support from Middle East countries, from some Asian countries, but they will not manage to get as much support as the American always do. So the United Nations is not going to be the place to resolve this situation because there will be no fair solution coming from the United Nations there. We're just looking at a situation which it became very, very messy, a lot of damage, and everybody denying anything that's happening against them. When we know the truth of the matter on the ground, we hope that we find out very soon.
But Mr. Ragab, any observer or watcher of the situation would notice that China's sharp focus is on worrying domestic issues. The COVID crisis has consumed most of the government's attention. The ensuing economic difficulties have reduced China's capability to continue its checkbook diplomacy as it did before the pandemic. These hardships are further complicated by the Russian war in Ukraine, and in which China was dragged, albeit unwillingly, let's say, as Russia's ally to face the West's rage and hostility. Having said that, however, Mr. Ragab, we do notice that China is far less constrained in the foreign policy arena, with recent activities in the BRICS and the Shanghai Organization, and less once it deals with its domestic issues once and for all. So what's expected from Biden's Asia engagement to align with allies, as you were saying, and partners, and in comparison to what China is doing?
Well, China's been in the radar for the American, and maybe this war does also aim at Russia and all the progress they've done economically and financially around the whole world, especially in America. So it was worrying to the American. So the American are aiming at the Chinese as well. The Chinese have made a lot of economic progress around the world, and the American will not let progress further. So the American are involving the Chinese in this war economically. But if we go back to what is being said by President Putin, that if he made sure that some European countries are directly involved in the war, he will not hesitate to hit them. And it has been proven that the British are there physically and with weapons as well. A lot of British officers been arrested, and still has not fulfilled his promise. So there is some act happening there in the background. There is some threatening happening from both sides that no one is committing 100% to the threat he does. But we don't want it to get to that situation that really people have to do what they threaten with. But if we go back to the Chinese are indirectly involved in this war. Everybody now is asking or calling to use their own currency instead of using the dollar. Of course, we know that the dollar now is in its best situation according to what's happening on the ground. That will not carry on if the Russian and the Chinese and a lot of other countries now are planning to use their own currency. So that will increase of the messy situation in the war between Russia and Ukraine. And we cannot really say that this war is between Russia and Ukraine. We can say it is between the West and the East.
Exactly.
Some people are involved directly, and some people are involved indirectly.
Very nice. Let us just catch up a little bit on what you said with Ms. Zhang Shui. How do you respond to our distinguished guest comments? And just as a note, China has never dictated to any country to do this or that, or to change their regime or their government. And like the US does with many countries, they would like to build this partnership and investment and so on. But then they would always dictate, let's say, democracy's kind of system and impose their culture on others. How do you read it yourself?
I would say that this is very good question that you posed, and I would also want to say that I think most of the commentators today, I do agree with your opinions on the U.S. strategy to encountering China to try to prevent Chinese development as what every country has its own right to develop itself. And so we can see that the U.S. is trying to play with different kind of cards, especially the cards with the regional issues, the card with economic development, and also the cards that we can say, we can also see some military and also things that happening, especially since 6 months in the South China Sea, in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, whereas those are actually Chinese internal issues, but not external issues, but not international issues. So this is a kind of a sign for the U.S. to give more stress to Chinese development and actually to make things very complicated.
Well, we seem we're having connection problem with Ms. Zhang Shanhui. We'll get back to you, and perhaps we will ask Alessandro Gargaridis what he thinks of all of this.
Well, let's say that it is a complicated matter in the sense that, of course, there are, from the United States point of view, two diverging interests in two theaters, so to speak, Europe and the Asia Pacific. And as I was saying before, the recent war in Ukraine forced the United States to shift its focus back to Europe. Not that it was abandoning it before, but for sure it didn't intend to increase its commitment. It wanted to keep it low profile, so to speak, and favor China and focus on China's rise instead. And we can also see that in some way the war can be considered beneficial for China in the sense that even though the United States is not directly involved, it's still supplying, along with its Western allies of NATO, it is supplying weapons and economic aid to Ukraine.
So by saying that it is an opportunity for China, do you foresee that China stands to be the big strategic winner if, as seems likely, Ukraine becomes a protracted trial of strength between Russia and the West?
Yes, that could be, in the sense, as I was saying, that the war in Ukraine has forced the United States to provide assistance to Ukrainians, and also to deploy military forces in Europe just in case, which means, of course, that all these assets and the resources will not be available for the Indo-Pacific theater. And of course, this is something that benefits China. So I don't think it is something decisive and revolutionary, but of course, it will bring benefits to China and give it less pressure to overcome to carry on its geopolitical objectives in the region.
Very nice indeed. And then maybe we have Ms. Zhang Shanghui. Are you with us?
I'm with you. I think I've got disconnected.
Yes, so we had that problem. You can actually resume what you were saying.
Yes. So what I was saying, that I do share the point of view of all our guests today. And I think that it is actually today a global issue. And today, China is not the only one who is actually in this dilemma. There's also many Asian countries, there are also many Arabic countries today are actually faced with very similar issues. We can see that there's the western part and the eastern part ways of thinking, and the value are not always the same. So China has never wanted to change the world order. China has always been there to adapt itself to the world order. China has always wanted to keep to its engagement, its historical engagement till today, to simply actually to addict to what he said, simply to what China had said, and keep its promise. And so China have never wanted to dominate the world. China has never wanted to influence or to counter the development of other countries. So I think that the value is kind of different today when we talk about the Western countries, especially for US, and when we talk about China. So I think China is more today to seeking more cooperations with developing countries around the world, and also with the developed countries, and to bring what Chinese people can bring to the world, especially in this post-COVID world, and with today's world faced with so many different kind of instability issues and uncertainties. So what can we do to improve the economic growth, to improve the global security together, but not leaving some countries, some superpowers like the US as one of the country that benefits the most from the Ukraine conflicts today with Russia by selling weapons. So I think today is more about peace talk. It's more about constructive talk and economical talk. How can we, China, and we can also see that China during 5-10 years, this recent 5-10 years, China is also now building its own dialogues. We can think, for example, about its Belt and Road Initiative. We can also talk about the SOE, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Those are actually constructive talks to see how we can benefit together each other between the development countries.
Very nice indeed. And here, let me bring Mustafa Ragab to tell us if it's true that China's economy, let's say, has been hurt by rising commodity costs and the COVID pandemic, but it's a small price to pay for increased, let's say, global cooperation, as Mrs. Zhang Shanghui was just saying. How do you read let's say, the role that China is playing when it comes to opening dialogue with other nations, when it comes to cooperating with other nations without dictating any rules on anyone whatsoever, unlike what the US is doing, Mr. Ragab?
Well, let us say that everybody has suffered from the pandemic. Everybody. There is no one that haven't suffered. So this issue, we can leave it aside. But we cannot ignore the huge progress that China has made economically and militarily. And that will worry the West.
Yes.
That will definitely get them very concerned. So the West is playing the cards, I don't know, rightly or wrongly at the moment, but there will be no winner in this war. There's no winner in this war. Everybody will come out losing something. And the pressure that is being put on Russia now, that might make them fulfill their threat. That might make them use the last card they can play. Because the news that we're getting, whether we know it is true or not, because there's a lot of news in the media now, there's a media war as well. A lot of news coming out that it's not true. So the media war is also playing a big part at the moment. The things that we see coming, that Ukraine is on the border of Russia, that Russia lose thousands of soldiers, tanks and all that. But on other news, we see that the Russian are making a lot of progress, and they are thinking of making a referendum of the countries they are in. But going back to the big power around the world, which is no doubt it's China now, and the American will try and create some little problems here and there, as warnings you can say, as messages you can say, by sending their diplomats to Taiwan, and the Russian will respond by flying some. The Chinese will respond by flying some aeroplane over Taiwan. So there is some tactical point going on there. Messages, warning, calling, whatever you like. But we come down to the end that this is a very dangerous game that we're watching, and it might really lead us to a third world war. Or we can say the third world war is happening now, but not in that very dangerous scale if we have to use the atomic bomb or the bomb or whatever. So there is a messy situation on the ground. We're getting the news every day. A lot of it is not right. A lot of it is just messages to the people or to hit the other side within their community, to make the community lose confidence in their leaders,
an unprecedented
or in their
information
army.
war indeed.
Yes. So this is happening at the moment. I'm really very concerned if that developed into more scale or dangerous scale. Already the whole world is suffering from this war. The economy is being hit all over the world. The supply is also less and less every day. So we are watching a very messy situation and a very dangerous situation, and a lot of people playing parts in it, whether they say directly or indirectly. But I hope it will not expand
everybody's
more
trying
than
to
that.
find a position amid a new world order that is taking shape. And here, Mr. Alessandro Gargaridis, like some analysts underline, the Ukraine situation has escalated due to pure mistrust. Russia is uncomfortable with having NATO installed on its doorstep. Ukraine feels threatened, and the West is suspicious of Russian motives. Don't you think that a meaningful discussion about the expansion of NATO and the sovereignty of Ukraine by a neutral party perhaps may have led to a more desirable outcome, unlike what we are seeing now? I don't pretend it's easy, but it can't, I can't see that happening when it's just being dealt with by conflicting parties. What is your opinion?
Well, for sure, one important thing is that in the current stage, all the parties involved seem determined to go to the end, so to achieve their goals, no matter the cost, or at least no matter the acceptable cost, because I hope that no one wants to reach the nuclear threshold. But as the situation is currently, I don't think there is much willingness to dialogue between the parties involved just to prevail. So this attitude is not favoring a diplomatic solution. And you mentioned a possible mediator, a third party. In principle, that could help, but it's also difficult to find a suitable mediator. That's the first step in any mediation, because it must be a power that is considered neutral, acceptable, and unbiased, but by all the parties involved, and this is very difficult to achieve. So it
Yes,
will not
but
be easy.
yet again, yes, it is difficult to achieve. But then we see the European Union is still wallowing in this energy crisis, and even the division inside, especially when they back down from imposing a cap on Russian gas prices. The EU will go ahead with taxing perhaps the surplus profits of energy companies. But then why would the EU retreat from its decision now? And how do you explain other EU member states arguing over the imports, especially those who have large imports of gas from Russia?
Of course, the European Union is not a single unified power like the United States. It is an international organization, a very particular one, but still not a state. And because of that, there are multiple voices coming from the different states, and finding a compromise and a single unified view is very difficult. And I believe that it will depend on how serious will become the issue of energy during winter, which also means how harsh winter will be. Because I believe the only thing that will bring the European Union to reduce or at least, or even lift the sanctions on Russian gas, it's internal turmoil. Seeing protesting in the street, dissatisfaction, rise of parties that are considered populist or even pro-Russia, and all of such kind of things. This, I believe, is the only way that might bring the European Union to change its stance on this matter.
Very nice. And Ms. Shang Hui, we always hear that the world powers are seeking position of strength and attempts to expand military alliances and seek one's own security that rival powers would see at their own expense of security. So this will only land oneself in a security dilemma. This is similar to what President Xi Jinping said, and hence the war in Ukraine. So why do we always see the West worrying about countries that don't have the same, let's say, thinking, the same ideology, worry about them developing?
I think this is a very good question. The problem of different values that people could have. When we are seeing a country that we don't know that much, or a country that we don't know about its culture, about its value, and when we're seeing this going very quickly, especially a very rapid economical development for the past 30 years, so people get scared. That's the first thing. So I think that between countries, we need more communications, and not only more communications, more sharings about thoughts, about economical benefits, but also how to make the cake bigger. That is, I think, the key issue today, to get more world peace today. Because when people are driven by the same goal, by the same benefit, and by making the cake bigger so that people can actually have its own share in this global development. So that's the problem. From the time that we can see today, we've got inflations in Europe, we've got lots of inflations in the US, we've got these economical uncertainties around the world. And so what we can see today is, with the impact of the COVID-19 in China, we can see that now the government is using different kind of methods to reactivate the economy. So that should be the same case in the world this month. And recently we can see that the inflation is going to a very peak point today around the world. So how can we, focusing on the economical development, how can we focusing on getting this cake bigger and bigger, and that each country can has its own share, but not always like certain their attentions on the very small benefit. So I think that is something that we need to talk about in the future. For example, the green development.
How do you see the security dilemma here, especially then when we see that these rival countries are all the time highlighting the fact that their own security is at jeopardy?
this is the case in the Ukraine and the Russia issue. And so that is important. I think I would say that it's also still the development of the economy. And we can also see that today China's security is more or less also threatened with the U.S., what's going on around this Asian Pacific region. So it is a very key issue today that we need to focusing on is how to protect its own territory. I think this is something that China needs to develop today with its neighboring countries to develop this peace talk. And that should be the same, at least in Chinese position, to promote a peace talk between the Russia and Ukraine issue today.
Very nice. And let me bring Mr. Mustafa Ragab. Mr. Ragab, it's no secret that global governing institutions have been broken for a long time, spotlighted by a series of recent crises that have received limp attention: the COVID-19 pandemic, the climate change, the return of Taliban to power in Afghanistan, popular uprising in many countries, coups d'etats, the turning of blind eye to just causes such as Western Sahara, Palestine, and so on and so forth. I mean, many would argue that the international system, the UN, is not really effective. It's just talking heads, let's say, not really having any impact. Is that true?
It has never been effective. Never. We've been through a lot of situations, a lot of conflicts, and the United Nations has never, ever been effective in any of them. All through the years, that has been proven. But let me tell you that the superpower don't exclude any country from their agenda. Don't forget when Henry Kissinger said, or he was asked, how are you going to go to war with Iraq in that short time? And he said that we have a plan to invade every single country in the world. And when the time comes to do that, we just get the file off the shelf and brush it and add to it and do it. So they don't exclude anybody from their agenda, whether they have anything to threat the world or whether they are strong or weak. So the superpower always include everybody in their plans, just in case. We are witnessing here the control. It's a war of control. And I will prefer for these two superpower, Russia and America, to remain. At least we can keep the balance. But if they manage through the war that is going nowadays to harm the Russian, that would be very, very dangerous. Then we will see one power controlling the world. Of course, we have to count for China, but we are already having two superpower. The Chinese might come to it if anything happened to Russia, but that will be a different balance around the world.
Very nice, Mr. Ragab. And just as a final question to Mr. Alessandro, we don't have enough time. Just to wrap it up, Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz shocked many by suspending the highly priced Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline from Russia and by creating a huge fund to boost the country's armed forces. For the first time since the Nazi era, Germany has begun to rearm, and Europe cheered. Quite extraordinary and quite alarming as well, seeing this deteriorating, let's say, security situation around the globe. How do you read that very briefly?
Well, Germany, of course, is affected by the shock of the Ukraine war, which prompted it to revamp its military forces. Not after World War II, because during the Cold War, the West German military was pretty proficient as well, but since the 90s it has become quite neglected. But yes, as all European powers, it's affected by this conflict, and it is trying to change its stance, even though of course it will take time, because you cannot build an effective and efficient army in a matter of a few months. It will take years and considerable investments for this.
Very nice indeed, Mr. Alessandro Gargaridis, Ms. Zhang Shanghui, and Mr. Mustafa Ragab. Thank you so much for your thorough analysis, and thank you too, dear viewers, for keeping it here on All 24 News. That's the end of our special coverage for today. Bye for now.